We are back. It is Colts Corner with myself, Kevin Bowen, here on a Wednesday afternoon. We're coming at you from the Colts complex, and it'll actually just be myself today, kind of busy afternoon, so I wanted to get this done. I actually recording this just prior to walking out to Colts practice, so I'll be out there. I'll have a availability report that I'll put out on Twitter, but hopefully nothing too earth-shattering from a news item standpoint. We do know Mooney Ward not going to practice, concussion protocol for him. So that's probably the biggest news item as we sit here kind of midweek leading into week 2. We'll look at the Colts and Broncos coming up 4:05. It'll be a whiteout inside of Lucas Oil Stadium. They'll go a little bit earlier this year. No more of the winter wonderland like they've done in years past. They'll do the whiteout. Coming up, Colts and Broncos, 4:05. I think that's the Kevin Harlan crew with Trenton Green and Melanie Collins coming up with Denver, a slight favorite here in week 2. But yeah, let's start there with Travarius Ward. Winning that blue tent at one point on Sunday, stayed in the game and actually played kind of late in that game. One item maybe to keep an eye on. Colts defensive starters did not have to really play at all. 40 snaps I think was the tops, and that's a very low number when you think about a normal game, especially with how much the Colts defense was on the field last year. So, just something to keep an eye on heading into week 2. But corner depth definitely going to be tested. Jalen Jones going to miss some time. Well, I assume he would go on injured reserve. I don't know. Maybe they don't need the roster spot, but with him and Mooney Ward potentially out, and he still has time to get through concussion protocol. I don't know. Percentages would say probably 80-90% of guys that miss the Wednesday practice with concussion-like symptoms end up not playing in the game, but you still have time to practice on a Thursday and make it through the rest of the week. But if he is not, then you will have cornerbacks of Kenny Moore the second. You'll have Xavier Howard. We'll see what they do at that third spot. You could put Mekhi Blackman in the slot or outside, I guess, and keep Kenny as slot or outside. You could put Jonathan Edwards, as more of the taller, corner. He's probably more of the frame, honestly, of a guy like Travarius Ward. And then they do have Chris Lamont in the practice squad if they want to entertain anything like that and call up him. Again, that would probably push Kenny outside. I feel like from a game standpoint, I can think of far more potent passing offenses that this would not be a good situation. I know that obviously comes off as me taking a shot at Denver, which I guess I am, but I just don't view Bo Nix and this passing offense as a very potent group. And, frankly, I'd rather have this cornerback depth in week 2 than in week 1, if you're going to look at the schedule from a quarterback and a wide receiver standpoint. So again, we'll continue to monitor that as the week moves along. A couple other items to get to. I thought Shane Steichen was pretty serious in his Wednesday press conference, and he's largely a very serious individual, but he wanted no part in looking back at last year's game at all. He did not want to entertain really anything on that front, and I kind of walked away from it thinking to myself, I guess this is the first time that I've ever really covered a Colts coach that, is having to tone down maybe outside expectations. And I should preface that by, in the last couple of years, just kind of, all right, let's all, try to keep things into this is a 17-week grind, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas in most years, you're having to play the uplifting card. You're having to play the, other angle to it. So I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into Shane's body language, but I just thought he had a tad more of a serious approach to him on this Wednesday morning. A couple other news items from the week that I wanted to make sure we got to on the JT Tuimoloau front of him being inactive. Again, it's pretty rare for a top 3-4 round pick to be inactive, especially early in the year. And the thing about JT Tuimoloau is, he's got a pretty finished product at Ohio State. Started for 3 years there and played so well in the playoffs. It's not like he was a project pass rusher that you drafted. No. This is a guy that you would have, put as a guy that should help you out early on. Basically, the explanation has been they've opted for more defensive tackles than defensive ends in week one. We will see if that is something that continues, against Denver, for example. I mean, they are kind of a run, heavy team. So, do you continue to do the defensive tackle thing over defensive ends? Again, 5 defensive tackles versus 4 DNs. I mean, in an ideal world, I think he would be getting some reps, but, it doesn't sound like this is hey, we're disappointed or he needs to meet us here, anything like that. It sounds like we trust Samson Ebukam and Tyquan Lewis as our backup ends right now. And, when you think about it, Anarumo has largely been a guy that plays more veterans than he does younger players. So we'll see how this continues to evolve here moving forward. But again, it doesn't sound like it's a slam dunk that all of a sudden, even if they do, well, I guess if they dress 5 defensive ends, yes, but, basically he's not in that top 4 defensive end depth chart is kind of how I would put it right now. Some of you asked about the Colts being announced as a team on Sunday. It sounded like that was kind of a last-minute Shane Steichen sort of decision, and not necessarily married to it moving forward. I don't know. Was he nervous what the reaction could have been for whatever, the offense getting announced and Daniel Jones getting announced last? Hell, if he has the offense get it announced on Sunday, Daniel Jones might have the biggest cheer a Colts quarterback has gotten in some time. So, again, a couple of you had asked about that, so wanted to make sure that we kind of cleared that. And I would just say kind of last news item, because, I think we've gotten this a lot this week, of the week one sort of reaction of, hey, are the Colts that good or the Dolphins that bad? I get that, welcome to the news cycle every year after week one in the NFL, particularly after blowouts. But I probably side a little bit more on, I think the Colts deserve credit for what they did in week one, and we should not just say Miami's a bad football team. The Colts won a game by 25 points. I don't believe they've won a game by at least 20. I think you got to go back to a shutout of Houston in 2021. So, you add up all the games between then. That's 55 games. 55 games you've played. You've played some bad football teams in a 55-game stretch, and for you to have not won any of those games by, 20 points, I think to me kind of speaks to, all right, that is an impressive outing. And again, I get that that's kind of how life works in the NFL in recapping week one games, but to me, I think the Colts deserve proper and credit because, for the last, 2.5 years, 3.5 years, I guess it is, they haven't really even sniffed a win of that. I mean, the score was a direct indicator of how much the Colts dominated that game. It's not like Miami went for 3 4th downs inside the 10-yard line and missed them all, or, they just gave you these, muffed punts or muffed kickoffs, things like that. No. That was an ass beating, frankly. And to me, I think the Colts definitely deserve credit with that. All right, let's get into Denver. Certainly defensively, it kind of speaks for itself. They are a unit that I think has very notable players in the front and in the secondary. Linebacker-wise, probably a little bit unheralded. I mean, the rich get richer at corner. Riley Moss, for example, didn't play. First off, Patrick Surtain, probably the best corner in the league. And then Riley Moss didn't play in last year's matchup. That was a big storyline. They go out, they draft Jahdae Barron, who I don't think the Colts kind of view Justin Wally in his light, but still, I mean, that's, kind of adding a ton to corner. They go out and they get the 49er safety in free agency as well. So, I mean, I think on paper, it is one of the more, it's probably one of the more impressive secondaries that is out there. 6 sacks in week one of Cam Ward, all 6 by different players. I mean, they averaged 2.4 yards per play. Tennessee did against Denver, which is just a ridiculous low number. Now, again, Tennessee gifted them a ton of penalty yards, over 100. And despite all that, they still had a chance to win the game in the fourth quarter. I mean, it was a 13-12 game, pretty deep into that fourth quarter. So I think like when you look at last year's matchup in that game, I thought the Colts largely controlled that game. And, again, I don't want to rehash too much because I know it brings up bad memories. But, if Taylor doesn't drop that ball, I mean, that's 20-7. And I almost find it hard to imagine the Colts losing that game. And then, for Denver to have scored 24 unanswered after that is just mind-numbing how much it unraveled. And, I think very highly of Shane Steichen as an offensive mind, and I'm just still stunned at the trick play call of A.D. Mitchell or Richardson to Mitchell back to Richards. It's just shocking. It's almost like someone had taken Shane Steichen out and asked some fan in section 628 or something to call a play after having 8 beers on a game day. It was just stunning that was the choice in such a critical juncture of the season. And frankly, you probably got what you deserved in deciding that was logical in that moment there. Bo Nix did play Lou Anarumo last year. Now, again, that's different personnel. Anarumo with Cincinnati, Nix with Denver. And Nix was good in that game. He had 3 touchdowns. That was one of the crazier games. I don't know if probably some of our listening audience will remember that one. That was a wild late December game where I want to say both kickers missed field goals in overtime, and Cincinnati actually pulled it out there late. So Denver wants to run it, and it's different. It's J.K. Dobbins and R.J. Harvey. I mean, it's a different run game than Estime and Javonte Williams and some of those guys that ran it against Indy last year. Going back to Mooney Ward for a second, I did think this was maybe a game where you would shadow that opposing top wideout. Like, would you do a little bit of Cortland Sutton shadowing with Travaris Ward, considering I think there's a little drop off in skill sets to Troy Franklin and to Marvin Mims, but maybe this throws a little bit of a wrinkle into that with that. So Nix was really bad, frankly, last year against the Colts. Granted, it's a totally different defense, and it'll be interesting to see how he plays against Lou in that one. So I feel like that kind of covers everything. I know the Xavier Howard comments about Tua and how the Colts, knew if they took away his first read, blah, 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 have been getting a lot of play this week. And I am kind of generally curious, and, how much does the X player is now on the other team, how much of that is that a real storyline? Obviously Howard got a lot of play because he had played so many games with the Dolphins, but is that really something that matters? And for this week, I say that because, you've got Sam Ehlinger on Denver's roster, and, I would think Ehlinger would have wonderful insight into the Colts offense, in particular Shane Steichen and him as a play caller and all of that. So here's a guy who's been the backup for Steichen, several times, and obviously has been in the Colts organization. He can't help you from an Anarumo standpoint, but he can help you in some other areas. So I don't know. Maybe that's a storyline we make too much of in the old media world, but maybe it's not. So I think that largely covers everything. Denver, again, their front and Nick Bonito and that pass rush. That's just what so much of this is going to come down to, because I did think going back and watching Sunday's game on Monday more, and I think I mentioned it a little bit on the Monday podcast, but I want to make sure that I mention it again. I thought the Colts offensive line and pass protection was outstanding. And I don't think there's maybe a way to say this without kind of discrediting Daniel Jones, but if you're going to give an NFL caliber quarterback that type of pocket, it's really hard to screw that up. I mean, they're operating from, especially given Miami's secondary issues, that is not likely going to be the case against Denver. First off, their secondary is much better. Secondly, asking your O-line to protect like that again, is probably a bit too far-fetched. Now, I will say this, because obviously there's a lot of debate right now about, okay, is this Daniel Jones for real, and is this a resurrection, and oh my gosh, this is the player that he was in 2022, and the Colts have found their new franchise quarterback. One thing that I think people are skeptical of is if I solely said to you, do you bet on Daniel Jones individually to be the real deal, to have resurrected his career, however you want to define it? You'd probably be skeptical. But if I said you're going to get offensive line play that he did not sniff or have for long stretches in New York, would that change your answer? And that might sound too glass half fully, but I do think that is a legitimate question that could be happening here in Indianapolis. Like, is your offensive line now back to being whatever, a top 10, top 5 pass protecting unit? Obviously, those are lofty standards, but across that offensive line, you've got first and second and third round picks all over the place. And Tony Sparano Jr., by all accounts, is a great position coach. So if you believe in that, that to me is a little bit more of, okay, you can have conviction behind that. You can actually bet on that. And then the domino effect is obviously Daniel Jones is operating from much more of a cleaner pocket than what he had in New York. So I forget what the stat was out there. I think Stephen Holder might have had it from ESPN, but he mentioned, on average, Jones had 12 or 13 pressures against him in New York, and we're talking about a guy that was hit twice and sacked once on Sunday, and they threw it 29 times. It's not like they had a small day throwing the football. So I do think that's a question that you can speak to. Colts going for their first 2-0 start since indeed the Super Bowl year of 2009, a year they started 14-0. You imagine Chris Ballard demanding that they bench the starters to rest them for the playoffs, a la Bill Pullen. Can you imagine that 180 on that movie? That would be out there. All right, let's get into a couple Twitter questions. We didn't get a lot of them this week. Typically when the Colts are good, we don't get Twitter questions. It's kind of how it goes. Here's Brian. Great to see a win on Sunday. The Colts actually look like a competent football team. Maybe this year things will be different because Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen are being held accountable by ownership. Time will tell, but really good to see. Yeah, I mean, the old holding of accountability is always, kind of a big phrase. I would say this about the 2025 Colts. Unquestionably, they have made changes to areas where they struggled. The most obvious one probably being either quarterback or defense. And defensively, Lou Anarumo's track record, definitely different than Daniel Jones's. So, they're taking a total 180 systematically on defense. They made investments in the secondary we've never seen under Ballard. Quarterback-wise, I don't necessarily think Daniel Jones is the biggest change possible. I think they have tried with other style quarterbacks like Jones. But again, committing for that guy. And, naturally he got all those reps late in the spring. And then, once he was named starter, of course, camp was over. But still, he got, a lot of those reps there for the couple weeks to end August into September. That's obviously different. And then, Tyler Warren's just a stud. He's just a flat-out stud. And he is already a weapon. I wrote it on our website, 1075thefan.com. I know I hit it on Monday's show of just go back and you watch the 2 plays in the red zone where he doesn't even catch the football, where Minka Fitzpatrick commits what should have been a pass interference penalty, and then the Pittman touchdown. that's what Warren has already commanded in week 1. And I'll say what I said on Monday. If I'm Denver and Vance Joseph, I'd think of Patrick Surtain and think, should we line him up with Warren? I get the physicality. It might not end well if you're in a jam situation, but if you're throwing it up to the guy, that is a very real combo. So, again, the holding of accountability, I think, is kind of a juicy phrase. I think in Ballard's case, it was finally, damn, the binder that I brought to 2017's press conference, it is not working. And if I want any chance of saving this, I need to do something different. And the blueprint has got to change. And I speak largely there to the defensive side. And then if you want to go to quarterback, that probably a little bit more of a Steichen thing of, okay, yes, the self-creator, fine and well, but can I just bet on myself, bet on the 10 others on offense, try to manage the operation? And now it's, all about stringing it together for, 17 weeks. Because, you can look at week 1, fool's gold, and, I know last year the Saints are obviously the poster child of it, 47 points in the opener. I think it was 44 in week 2, and then boom, Dennis Allen's the first coach that gets fired. And the Colts had it, 20 20 was it when they lost to Jacksonville week 1 and that ended up being Jacksonville's only win of the season? And then the Colts go on to win 10 and we're a play away from beating Buffalo. So, yes, Miami, bad at cornerback, bad on the offensive line. Those areas the Colts obviously took advantage of, running into the punter, offsides on a 3rd and 10, dropped interception, 1st and 30 becomes a hold, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, again, there are teams that can aid you in that, but I'll go back to what I said earlier. 55 games. That's how long ago it was since the Colts did something like that to another team. Now, and they played a lot of bad football teams in that stretch. Stringing it together, that's the hardest thing about the NFL. That's probably the beauty of what makes this league so difficult each year, each and every year. All right, final Twitter question here from Brett. Vibes are immaculate after Sunday, but I told myself I'd ask this regardless. If the Irsay daughters had taken over the team exactly 1 year earlier, do you think Ballard would have still been here for year 9? So they would have taken over May in 24. They would have watched last season unfold. They would have seen those visiting crowds that invaded Lucas Oil. The only reason why I pause at it is just how much was Carly on board with this project plan. First-year head coach, Richardson, we need to create a window of patience. And even though Ballard was hired, 6 years before Steichen, that's what we need to do. Like, did they agree to that or not? Because, again, the hardcore facts, to me, the little I know of Carly Irsay-Gordon, I think will matter to her. I think 10 years of no division title, longest playoff drought in 30 years as a franchise. What was it? The 4th longest playoff drought currently of any team in the league. Smallest crowd at Grand Park, and TV ratings are low in the preseason. I mean, those are the dollars and cents stuff. And that, to me, I think would be very bothersome. And then is there just an element of you want your fingerprints on it early on? Do you want to, take kind of an early stand to it? So I guess I would say yes, but to the question, but still, did they agree to the project? That I think is probably one of the bigger questions of it. All right, prediction time. Again, a slight favor. I want to say the over-under is pretty low, 42.5 for this one. At the start of the year, I picked Denver to beat Indy. Yeah, 2-point favor right now as I look at it. 42.5 is that over-under. Boy, I'm definitely more torn on it than I was at certainly this time last week. Bo Nix is not overly impressive to me, and I do think that's where the Colts have definite advantage. And I thought Denver was a bit underwhelming in week 1. Their defensive element, though, I still think is such a 180 from what the Colts saw on Sunday. And frankly, I just think Sean Payton's a very good football coach, and I don't think Miami's very well coached. And so that has me leaning Denver. I expect a pretty close game. I'll go 23-20 maybe. Broncos in this one. If you can protect Jones close to what you did, though, in week 1, then I really think the Colts have a great shot to win this game. So another beautiful opportunity with a rookie quarterback after that. And, we'll see the Rams' health situation after that. And home games with the Raiders and Cardinals. So you got to get on it early. So just what a great, great chance for the Colts to continue to play from ahead early in the season. We will be back Monday late morning recapping week 2 Colts and Broncos. This is Colts Corner with Kevin Bowen signing off.